Well, now for round two. We've just had a conversation about the law enforcement's views in the encryption debate, and now we will include some other views as well into the conversation. We have next to me Matt Blaze. He's one of the world's leading cryptographers. He's an associate professor of computer and information science at the University of Pennsylvania. We have John Callas. He's Chief Technology Officer at Silent Circle. That's an encrypted communications firm. And we have Kiran Raj, who is Senior Counsel to the Deputy Attorney General at the US Department of Justice. So thanks to you all for joining me. And we will, again, have some questions up here, and then we will open it up to the audience for your questions as well. So just to start, why don't I have a question for each of you, actually. So what do you see as the benefit to society to having strong encryption? And do you see those benefits outweighing or falling second to national security? Concerns about getting access to encrypted data. So Matt, let's start with you.
Okay, so I mean, it's really easy to frame this as a debate with a trade-off between national security and law enforcement on one side and privacy and strong encryption on the other side. And everybody participating in this debate for the last 2 decades easily falls into this because it's an easy way of reducing this to a simple principle, but I think it's completely wrong. Okay. This is a question of increasing national security and law enforcement and having encryption versus decreasing our national security and our ability to prevent crime by having weaker encryption. We're both on the same side about wanting to prevent and solve crimes, and we're both on the same side for wanting to make the country more robust against national security.
Warrant that what they need are mechanisms that can go beyond getting a warrant and just let them get the data, which is a policy issue of what gets protected from a legal aspect of it. And we're in a situation where we are forced to build our devices in countries that are not particularly always friendly, and yet we have to be immune from blackmail to them. That if they decide that people in friendly countries have done something like not hand their data over because that they just happen to be in other countries, how do we handle this? What is the policy of us juggling 170 plus countries and deciding who's followed what paperwork and who hasn't followed other paperwork?
And Kiran, what are your thoughts?
So I think it's important to start, sort of as Matt did, with the shared values that we all have. And that is ensuring that we have strong public safety and strong national security. And strong encryption is a tool to do that. And we do that within the context of our strong commitment to the rule of law. And so as you heard Amy and others talk about, strong encryption is important because it helps secure our commerce, it helps freedom of expression, it helps our data security and our IT security. And that's why the department, the FBI, and just the administration supports strong encryption. And I think the rubber really hits the road for us, though, when we design systems using strong encryption in a manner that they become warrant-proof. So it really raises it to a warrant-proof encryption. And what that means is that the system is designed so only the end users can access the information. And so I think when we think about what those shared values are, we have to figure out how do we design systems that maximize both our public safety and our national security interests, but also our cybersecurity interests as well. And that's really, when we talk about the conversation and the debate, what we're talking about.
So, Matt, you are a veteran of what's known as the crypto wars, these earlier battles over cryptography that took place in the 1990s. So how does the debate going on now compare to the debates back then?
You know, it's been an awfully long time, and we keep fighting a lot of the same battles. I think the main difference between you know, this discussion in the 1990s and today is that in the 1990s, a lot of this was hypothetical. We were saying things like, well, you know, this internet thing, it's going to be important someday, and we're depending on computers, and we're depending on this computerized network infrastructure for an increasingly important part of our daily lives, and being able to secure it is going to be really important really soon. And you know, I'm not even sure that I believed that it was going to be as important as it ultimately became. You know, every aspect of our daily life utterly depends on a secure networked infrastructure, on being able to secure endpoints. You know, this is so integrated into our daily lives, we can't even identify where. So I think the stakes have gone up enormously since the last time around.
Interesting, because you were also the one who discovered a flaw in the US government's Clipper encryption system, which had been proposed as a way for the public to encrypt their data but still allow access for law enforcement. But you know, as times have changed and technology becomes more integrated into people's lives, as you're mentioning, do you think that it is possible from a technical perspective now to create a solution like some of the ones that national security officials are proposing?
So one of the fallacies, I think, of this debate is that you know, it's often framed as, well, we've solved so many really hard technical problems. Look at all the wonderful things that we've done. Surely, you know, if we can put a man on the moon, we can design a secure backdoor encryption system. Unfortunately, it's not so simple. When I hear if we can put a man on the moon, we can do this, I'm hearing an analogy almost as if we're saying, if we can put a man on the moon, well, surely we can put a man on the sun. You know, this is an enormously hard problem, and it's not even a new problem. Ultimately, we're talking about a set of requirements that somewhere along the lines involve making a relatively simple problem of encryption between two parties who know who each other are and can identify each other, and only they can get access. It's a relatively simple conceptual problem, turning that into a very complex problem. And securing systems with complex requirements and building systems of that level of interaction in a way that work reliably and as we intend them to do has been a problem that's been around since the beginning of software and computing. And we don't know how to solve it.
So you don't think that it's technically possible to do this and still have systems be secure?
Right, a shorter version of my answer is no.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Kiran, what do you think? Do you think that that's true, that it's impossible to do this?
Well, I guess it's a puzzling argument in some ways, because when we look out right now empirically just at what companies are doing today, we see that there are large companies, for example, some of the commercial email providers, where they use strong encryption to protect the emails while they're in transit. They use strong encryption when the emails are at rest in the servers, but for their own business purposes, they have to be able to access the underlying content, and they do that for a variety of reasons. One is for, you know, potentially to serve you advertisements, but other reason is for data security, so they can scan malware, so they can scan for spam and things of that nature. We also see it in the corporate environment as well, where, you know, when corporations give laptops or phones to their employees, they want to make sure that if the employee leaves the phone in the taxi, that someone's not going to be able to look at the information because it's sensitive information. So that information is generally protected with strong encryption. Yet the corporation also, for insider threat purposes, for data backup purposes and the like, will also be able to have access to that information. And so when we look out and we see that there are companies now who've been able to figure out how to do that balance, how to ensure they have strong protections and security for their data, but also have access to it, it's difficult when we hear that, oh, it's technically impossible to do this. And so, again, I think we have to have that discussion about, do we want to really encourage situations where we are building systems that are warrant-proof, that basically provide safe zones for criminal activity, or do we want to have the larger discussion say, hey, there are companies that do it today, can't we do that as well?
Mm-hmm. But going back to some points that we heard from Amy too, there doesn't seem to be one unified proposal, technical or otherwise, proposed by the U.S. government. So, why is that? And do you expect that the U.S. government will, in fact, put forward something more concrete?
So I think the reason why you don't see a single solution, because it just doesn't make sense given the industry today. Right? Each company knows their products and systems so much better than the government does, or frankly anybody else does. And so when we think about this, it really is about how does a company respond to a warrant or court order. They are the ones who are going to be in the best position to figure that out. So it doesn't make sense for the government to mandate some type of access regime or some type of golden key. Like, it just doesn't, in the world we live in today, that situation doesn't really make sense. It's what's much better. And frankly, I think all of us would agree it'd be better if the government has to go to a company with the court order and the company provides the information. And that's why in the debate today, we see a lot of articles that say the government is demanding actual access into the databases of companies, and that's just not the case. There's not going to be one solution that fits every single company. Some companies will do this, some companies will do that, and that's frankly the way they do it even today, right? One commercial email provider might have a different way of accessing the content than another commercial email provider. Same thing with the corporate environment.
So you don't necessarily see the government as having a role in the system. For some companies they might, but for others they might not?
Yeah, again, I think that the main point for the government is Congress and the American people have given the government certain authorities, right? Whether it's the Wiretap Act, search warrants, and the like. Mm-hmm. And when we have those authorities and we go to the companies and we serve them with an order, I think we just want the information that the order says that we can get. And how the company does that is frankly their business. And we want to work cooperatively with them. We want to help them. Some companies would work with us. Some companies can do it on their own. And that's why when we talk about how there's no one size fits all, that's really what we're talking about.
And so, John, what do you think about this? Kiran is saying there's no one size fits all, but you had also mentioned that there were policy questions involved in this.
And they do ultimately boil down to policy questions. Now, to Matt's thing, there is a traditional way to land a man on the sun, and that is that you go at night. I feel that that's what we're being asked to do, is to come up with a way to land on the sun at night. The thing that you're talking about with corporate access is in fact the easy part of the problem, and there are present solutions to that. However, when you have third-party people, and when you have, for example, an email provider that is holding other companies' emails, and I shut down an email system precisely because we were a provider that was using an encryption system that I built that was designed for an enterprise that doesn't really work in a model of third parties where I become the weakness that my customers have. And in that environment where there are cloud services, tenanted services, etc., it's very difficult to know who it is that you go to. There is a case that's going on now, which is the Microsoft case, where Microsoft has literally emails that they are dealing with in a cross-jurisdictional boundary, and we're having discussions that is just like this one, with the tech companies saying if they put their things in other countries, then it's in another country. And my biggest fear as an American who's formed a company in Switzerland is that we're going to be needing, and it seems like you're saying that we need to take our companies out of the US, that this wouldn't be a problem if, say, Apple were a European company, because then they would not be subject to the US things. You would have to get an MLAT and a warrant.
Right, and so just to pick up on that, Silent Circle, didn't you guys actually leave the U.S. for Switzerland over some concerns about government surveillance?
We were originally a Nevis company when we first incorporated. And when we created BlackPhone, we incorporated BlackPhone in Switzerland because it was a joint venture between us and a Spanish company. And then we moved Silent Circle to Switzerland.
But so you've essentially built your business on this promise of secure encryption. So if such a policy would go into effect, how would it affect your business, in particular your North American business, now that you are, a Swiss company?
Well, it depends upon exactly what's going on. Because again, this is not a technical problem. This is a policy problem. That if I am a Swiss company that has servers in Switzerland and someone who is not an American, how does U.S. regulation law affect that? If I have an American customer who is a customer of my company, how does that do? If I have an American customer that the Chinese want something, how do I handle that? And these are the policy questions, and it becomes a much harder problem even for the larger companies.
And so for those large multinational American companies, say an Apple as an example, how do you think, what would this do from the business side to their operations?
Well, again, would they have to be putting a back door in something? Because if they're going to have to put a back door into phones, which some of the encryption that is in there now is designed specifically to stop crime. Mm-hmm. That 2 or 3 years ago, Mayor Bloomberg said that a third of all New York street crime was people stealing iDevices. And there are now anti-theft mechanisms that are basically encryption mechanisms that make it so that you cannot get into a phone without the owner's consent because they were being stolen and then sent off to China, Russia, other places and sold at a markup. That these are anti-theft mechanisms. The things that we are doing for counter-espionage, that's pretty much what my whole company is revolved around, is that companies are being spied upon. It really is a huge Wild West out there where anybody who can get any information is doing so. So how do we go and adjudicate this 2- and 3-dimensional issue of where the customer is, where the warrant's coming from, and where we are and what we want to do? Because we do want to get rid of the bad guys.
And so, Matt, from your perspective, what role do you see companies playing in protecting, doing everything they can to protect consumer security and privacy?
So, I want to start with a confession here, and with all due respect to my friends who try valiantly to build secure products. On behalf of computer science and computer security, we really don't know what we're doing. We've been fighting a losing battle to build strong, secure, complex systems for longer than the crypto wars, since before I was even alive. And we are actually getting worse at it as time goes by. And the reason we're getting worse is that we have computer systems that can be larger and do more things and that are more complex. And we simply don't know how to secure large, complex systems. We have 2 things that work, and they don't work universally well. But these are the 2 techniques so far that that my field has come up with to mitigate our inability to build large, complex systems. One is crypto, because that lets you not trust more components of the systems. You don't have to trust communications links. You don't have to trust storage to the same extent. The second is make the system as simple as possible. Mm-hmm. And what we say when we're asked to put on our security hats and evaluate a large system is, how do I make it more secure? Well, make it as simple as you can, reduce the number of things that it does, and use encryption wherever you can. Unfortunately, the backdoor requirements work against both of those things, and that's what worries me.
And so I do actually want to ask you another, maybe perhaps a more personal question, as it speaks to your identity as a cryptographer. You go to these conferences and you talk to people, and it's such an emotional question for them because their whole job is, and lifestyle in a way, is to make these systems as secure as possible. Why do you think that this debate, do you think that plays into why this debate has become, in some cases, so polarized?
Well, I think the polarization of this debate is really harmful, and it's so easy to turn this into evil government people who want to spy versus people who want personal privacy. Mm-hmm. But I think that in terms of the end goals, there's a lot more common ground here than maybe the debate lets on. Mm-hmm. I think how we get there is where we differ from the FBI's proposal. But I think the goal of strengthening national security and preventing crime, is pretty well shared by almost everyone.
So Kiran, I see you nodding over there. What do you think about this?
Yeah, no, I think it's really an important point. Again, it goes back to what I started with, which is the shared values. I think when we start with, here are the shared values we all agree with, and frankly, there could be disagreement about how we best effectuate those shared values, and that's why we really talk about this as a discussion, as an open and informed discussion, sort of devoid of some of the more sort of pejorative terms and venom that has been a part of this debate. And that's why when we talk about this, I think it's the policy points that John brought up, from economic issues, competitive disadvantage, how do we ensure our companies remain the strongest in the world? Those are all valid issues that we have to talk through, and we have to understand what the implications of any decisions are. I guess my point there is, though, we should figure out what's right for us. How do we do that balance, and so that's part of this discussion. But if we can start with, we all have a shared values, which is improving and maximizing public safety and national security, while at the same time ensuring we have strong privacy and civil liberties in this country, I think that's a great start. And how we go from there is we move down on the discussion.
And something that has been affecting some of the debate is Edward Snowden and the leaks that happened 2 summers ago now. So, do you think that some of the encryption debate is getting, caught up in some of the other revelations about different kinds of surveillance, like the bulk collection of metadata and what the National Security Agency was revealed to be doing? And has this made your conversations with companies or even this case to the American public a little bit harder?
Sure, I think it certainly has infected some of the discussion, and one of the things we tried to emphasize that the going dark debate is different from the sort of 215 and metadata program debate for a couple of important reasons. Number one is, I think we can all agree that reasonable minds may disagree on where the line is for lawful government surveillance. But that is not this issue. This issue is, we already have the surveillance authorities Congress and the American people have given to us in the Wiretap Act, through Rule 41 search warrants and the like. So the issue here is, when we already have that lawful authority, we already have the court order for a wiretap order, for example, and then we go to a provider and the provider says, we can't comply. So that's an issue of capabilities and not authorities. And I think a lot of the NSA debate was really a question of what authority should government have. So it's a very different debate from that perspective. And I think the important piece here too, when we talk about the capabilities, is what that really means in practice is, no matter how serious the crime is, no matter the fact that a judge has made a determination that we have probable cause to believe that there's a crime in progress or there's criminal activity afoot, we are unable to get the information. And that is just a very different issue than the NSA issue.
Right. And so, John, to pick up on that, do you think that there seems to be general agreement that if law enforcement has a warrant, then they should at least be able to try or have access to that data through the court process. But do you think that it's reasonable to ask companies to, in some cases, redesign their systems to make these warrants happen?
We don't do that in any other part of our society, to make it so that a warrant is not a right that the government has to get data. It is a right to perform a search and to attempt to get the data. And there may be a lot of reasons why they can't get to it. And this is part of the U.S. part of the policy issue.
Right.
Because back again to where technology and policy meet is that we don't have a way to code intent. We do not have a way to code good guy into things. That if I am making a system that will protect people in business against not only semi-friendly countries, but intramural stuff that goes on, because we know that most countries are in fact spying on each other, and in most countries the country is specifically using its intelligence mechanisms to help the businesses in that country. And in the US, it's one of the very few countries where we have, I will say, anti-bribery. There's the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and so on. That it is actually illegal for law enforcement and intelligence to help U.S. business. There's plenty of allegations that that's going on anyway, but at least it's illegal. In many other countries, it is not only legal but stated policy. So if we make a system that works in one place, it has to work in another. We're kind of like Odysseus in things where we're having to lash ourselves to the mast. If we yield to one, we have to yield to all. And the policy issue that would need to come up would be a way that we would have some sort of international way that we could come up with international reasonable ways to do things. If we had that where the UN could say that's a reasonable request and that isn't, you could talk about having a simple technological thing where the keys are also held by the UN.
Interesting. So, walk me through what would happen if something like this went into effect, and let's say U.S. government gets some sort of channel to access it, and then the UK, which is a close ally, also wants to have its own system, and China wants to have its own system. So walk me through the position that this would place companies in, American companies.
Well, we have built systems that for a single organization, it can manage all of its encrypted data, all of its encrypted communications in a way that it can do oversight on itself. However, once you get into things like multi-tenanting, once you start having cloud services, once you start having any of these things like a provider that provides email to multiple other countries, then the policy issue comes up of who gets to say to the provider, I'm not getting satisfaction from your customer, so I need to come to you. And the rules around how you would do that are the policy questions of how you would do that.
And so, Matt, what do you think?
So I want to disagree with something that John said, which is that this is a policy question, and I agree that it's a policy question, but it's also more than a policy question. So you've described the abstract problems that you get if you could build something like this perfectly. But what you also get at the same time is making our whole infrastructure vulnerable to more of the OPM attacks, more of the Ashley Madisons, more of the Target breaches, more of the, pick your breach du jour.
Because there's a MacGuffin.
That's right.
There's a
Right.
thing that you can go after,
Right.
and that's why
Right.
our best decision is to make it so that nobody other than the end user can get there.
So I think the fundamental problem is that, or a fundamental problem, is that if a company builds in a backdoor or an ability to provide access to mass market products that are used by companies and individuals and by government, that company suddenly becomes an extremely attractive foreign intelligence target, and an extremely attractive organized crime target, and an extremely attractive drooling teenagers in the basement target. And we've seen all three of those categories of attackers succeed wildly in recent years. And we're going to see more of it if we create requirements that companies retain capabilities that would be very, very interesting to have for nefarious purposes.
And this is precisely the lash yourself to the mast thing that I was saying.
Yep.
The only real solution that we have to protecting our customers and ourselves is, in fact, to make it so that we are not a target.
And so, Kiran, I want to let you jump in here. What do you make of this, and what's at stake too if law enforcement doesn't get the access it needs?
Sure. Again, I think the idea that companies overnight are going to go to a system where only the end users are going to have access to it writ large is just not compatible with what we see today, right? Companies need to have access to data for their own business purposes. The majority of companies do, whether in the corporate environment or even in the consumer market. But there are certain types of systems where companies have started to design it where only the end user has access to it. And I think the important thing for folks to know is that those are the systems where, even with the warrant, even with the court order, the government will not be able to obtain the information. And so from the threat perspective, Amy talked a lot about that, so I won't repeat a lot of it, but it has real effects on real investigations, and it's important for folks to understand that almost every investigation we do at the department, and frankly even at the state and local level now, involves electronic information. And so if we are really creating a class of information that is in a sort of digital safe zone for criminal activity, that's a problem. And that's a problem we want to highlight for folks because they need to know what are, as technology advances. I guess the fundamental question is, do we want to have technology drive that, or should we drive it from a policy perspective? And so, that's really what this discussion is about. We want to let people know that this is happening. But I just don't see a world where companies will not have access to information for their own business purposes. So the real question is, what happens with those specific platforms, certain applications, certain devices, where there is a choice you could make to design it so it's warrant-proof, so only the end user has access, or design it so the company retains access and an ability to respond to a court order and a warrant.
So I do want to open it up to the audience for questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand, say your name and where you're from. Right up in the front here.
Thank you. Eric Geller from the Daily Dot. My question's for Mr. Raj. I wrote a big feature on the crypto wars, and all the security experts I talked to basically said, well, listen, the government keeps saying, we want to have this debate. We want to bring this out into the public. But we've been doing that for 2 decades. We've been doing that since the original crypto wars, yet the government keeps saying, let's just have this conversation, let's listen to the tech companies. What would you say to the idea that this is sort of settled with security experts and tech companies, that they don't want to do this, that they've heard the arguments, and that they can't see a way to do it securely?
Yeah, so I guess a couple of points. One, and I think Matt talked about this a little bit earlier, we're in a much different world now than we were 2 decades ago, just with the proliferation of the internet, digital information everywhere. So I think the threats and the risks are just much different than they were before. Number 2 is, back in the 2 decades ago, the government was asking for something different, right? There was an idea that there would be a split key, that one government agency would hold it and another government agency would hold another key. And that, again, is not what we are asking for today. What we are asking for today, or what we are telling folks, is that when we go to companies with a court order or warrant, they're unable to comply. We would like them to be able to comply with those court orders and warrants. And how they do it is up to them. It's based on their own system and their own designs. They know their systems best. And I'd say generally, we've been having very productive discussions with companies on these issues. And I think, back to the shared values, we all have those same shared values. And so the more we can do to figure out, how do we effectuate those values? How do we maximize the public safety and the national security, and also these important privacy, civil liberties, data security? We're in a different world now than we were two decades ago, and I think a lot of the companies and even technologists would agree.
We have another question up in the front.
Sharon Bovat, Voice of a Moderate. I'd like to ask about the issue with trust in the American people. I think that a lot of people, they see the selective prosecutions. Let's just use the ones of the whistleblowers that, their data was looked at, and I guess with the FISA, it goes overseas, so then it can automatically get collected. And then we're seeing some people that are higher up that might, just like General Petraeus, who got a slap on the wrist, Leon Panetta. So, a lot of people in the intelligence community leak. It happens all the time. Some people get prosecuted, others don't. And I think that the encryption issue stems from the lack of trust in government because of some of the selective prosecutions. And how do you see addressing that issue? Because I think once we all trust each other, then it'll be easier to go forward. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people would agree our country has one of the strongest commitments to the rule of law in the world. And it's something that we at the Department of Justice and frankly the whole administration think is very important. And so we try every day to ensure that we're building trust and maintaining trust with the American public, because we have to, and that's what the rule of law is based on, trusting the folks that are carrying out, investigations, prosecutions, and the like. So it is an important value to us and something that we strive to every day to and earn the trust of the American people.
Thanks. Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, Russell Shell, law student. My question is from the government official. The issue is about conflict of law and the situation where some tech companies may find themselves when they have to comply with a foreign law to hand over data, but that would bring them into conflict with U.S. laws that basically would make them liable for crimes for breaking U.S. laws. How do you resolve this conflict of law where increasingly tech companies are doing businesses globally and have to comply with multiple standards and laws, and how does the DOJ address this issue? What are your views on that, at least?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, and it's a question that companies are facing more and more every day. I guess the point I would make just generally on that issue is that that's a much broader than just really encryption or even going dark. Our companies today face those choice of law conflicts whenever, or in many cases when they're operating in a foreign jurisdiction. And so the companies work through those issues. Sometimes they have to do something specific to a particular company. It's really just going to depend on the specific laws, the specific facts and circumstances. But it is a growing problem in our global economy, absolutely.
And so just to loop you guys into this discussion as well, I mean, we had a question earlier for Amy Hess about what would happen if this policy goes into effect and to American business, the perception of American businesses abroad. So I mean, this plays into that a little bit. Maybe you both could take a stab at answering what would happen to, just at least from a perception that companies are working with the government or giving data to the government kind of uniformly.
Yeah. So I'll not even speculate on what that would do to trust in U.S. products abroad, but there's also the issue of making our infrastructure less secure, and I think we'll see a real tangible effect of the horrible security crisis that we're in today becoming measurably more horrible because tools for securing it become less robust and less available, and that would be horrible.
John?
I agree with Matt on that it does make it less secure. It ruins the security that we're building into things, and I'm going to disagree with him that I think we're making progress. But
I say we were making progress? I don't think so.
I think we're making progress. So
okay.
but it would ruin the reputation of all of these companies worldwide, because if there is a master key, that it is only a matter of time it gets leaked, it gets stolen, it gets misused. I mean, we have seen all across the board, whenever there is one of these databases, one of these central repositories for information, that people use it to check up on their ex. They use it to find out what their neighbor is really doing. And the fact that would happen would ruin the reputation, and it would also ruin the reality. The reputation would be ruined for real reasons, because it really would be weaker.
And I'll amend
Kiran.
my comment. John is making progress, no one else is.
Yeah, if we can, two points. One is, again, when we hear master key, golden backdoor, we just really have to be, I think, clear that no one is asking for that. Number two is that when you hear sort of arguments that companies' reputations are going to be ruined, again, it's a puzzling argument, because today we have large companies that can respond to court orders and warrants, who have billions of users around the globe who use their services, and we're not seeing some of those issues. And so, again, I think it's important to understand what we are in fact asking for, which is that we don't want situations where there's warrant-proof encryption, which is different than using strong encryption to secure data to secure your IT infrastructure, because that is something that we really value because of our mission in the cybersecurity area, the cybercrime area, and Amy has talked a little bit about that before. So I think that's important as part of this discussion.
You're not asking for the golden key, you're asking for the magic rainbow unicorn key that is only accessible to those who are of pure and noble heart.
The first time I've heard that proposal.
Well, again, except for all the companies who do it today for their own business purposes, right? Again, we have companies who can respond to court orders today. There's no magic key, there's no golden unicorn. They're able to do it, and that's why it's just
But they have no
puzzling.
security.
I think those companies may disagree with you.
It is the companies that are putting in security that you're getting upset about. I mean, the thing that has happened, I was agreeing with what you were saying before, that we have the shared values, we have all of this, but we're putting in the encryption precisely to stop crime, precisely to stop espionage. That the reason why Apple, Google, others are putting device security intrinsically into the device is so that the system is there so that when you have exactly what you're asking for, but now that we're doing it, we're being criticized for doing it.
Now, again, I think it's important because this really is an important point that is I think lost in the discussion. We want strong encryption. We want those devices to be secure. And I think the question is into the technologies, is the only way to secure it a manner where there is warrant-proof encryption? And there are a lot of companies today that have disagreed with that because they have built secure systems and they have been able to do that balance between being able to access the content for their business purposes and having secure systems. Now, if the answer is that there is no way to do it, if the technologists really believe it, they've tried super, super hard, and that's the answer, then that is something that the American public and folks should understand, because again, what we're saying is when we have these court orders, these authorities that the public has given to us and they are not being used, like we can't actually effectuate those orders. Like people need to know that. And that again, that's just the discussion that we have to have.
So I will admit that I'm flattered by the FBI's faith in my ability and my field's ability to produce these super secure products that you are worried will be warrant-proof. But frankly, I'm puzzled by the underlying assumption that we have any chance of actually doing that, and that the internet that we have today is adequately secure for just about any purpose you could imagine. I mean, I think we're in a national security and public safety crisis as we rely on this horribly fragile, horribly weak infrastructure. And I'm really worried about what happens when we rely on it more and more. And I think that's the number one cyber, and I promised myself I wouldn't use the word cyber today, problem that we're facing. And I think it's pretty close to an emergency.
So I want to pause you there. We do have another audience question right on the side here.
Name is Gary Cohn. I'm just a security technologist. 2 points. One comment and question. Comment is that it was mentioned that currently, when served with a lawful order, many companies are able to provide law enforcement access to the data they already gather in customers. With that in mind, I keep thinking in my mind, the Target breach, the recent Ashley Madison hack, and all these other company breaches. That wouldn't happen if the data was encrypted, especially if you end-to-end encrypted. And now for my question. It's one thing not often mentioned in this debate is that assuming everything was end-to-end encrypted, metadata will still be available to law enforcement when they serve companies for lawful order. Keeping in mind that Michael Hayden, the former head of the NSA, said that we kill people based on metadata. What is the difference if law enforcement's needs, that they need greater access to content if the intelligence community can make life or death decisions based on metadata alone?
Anyone want to take that?
Yeah, so Amy talked a little bit about the need for content, but I think it's helpful to explain a little bit about when we say wiretap order, for example, like what that actually means, because I'm not sure a lot of folks know, but what it means is not only, I think we affectionately call it sort of probable cause plus. So not only do we have to show probable cause that the target of the surveillance is committing enumerated federal felony and the phone facility that we want to target is being used as part of that crime, but we also have to show necessity. And so that means that we've either tried to do other techniques, less intrusive techniques, and have failed. So some of those techniques are physical surveillance, using an informant, using an undercover, pen registers, for example, toll records, those are considered metadata. And someone has to write up, the investigator writes up an affidavit that shows that they've done all these things or that they're too dangerous to do for whatever reason. And those things sometimes run hundreds of pages, huge affidavits. Then there has to be an application by the prosecutor that has to be reviewed by a supervisor that then goes to the main Justice Department, the Office of Enforcement Operations, OEO, in the criminal division, that is then signed off by a high-level criminal division official. And then at that point, it goes to a federal judge, a district court judge, who does his own independent analysis that the information satisfies the statutory requirements. And only then do we get the court order that says you can get the content of the communication. So it isn't the first thing that we do. In fact, many times it's called the investigative technique of last resort. And so when we have that order, we've already had enormous amount of internal review. We have a federal judge who reviews it as well. And only then do we go to the company and say, can we have the content of communications? And so in those situations, the metadata, for whatever reason, has not been helpful. And so, I think it's important to understand that in context. Like, this is not something that just happens right away. There's a huge amount of investigative resources and other techniques that are used before, in the wiretap context, we go and get a wiretap order.
We have time for about one more question. Does anyone else have a question in the audience? Yes.
Just hearing from you in that current context about all these methods that we use prior to actually asking for content, I'm curious if the DOJ or FBI will ever kind of provide numbers on how many times this actually happens in investigations, just because it feels like it's such an extreme situation that it's hard to imagine that it occurs more than just a few times. Will that data become available to the public?
Yeah, so Amy addressed that a little bit, which is that we do need to do better. We need to get better data on that. I mean, part of it is just, one of the hard issues is that it's, investigators, when they hit a wall, they don't stop, right? They do try to do other things. And so for a long time, we haven't been figuring out like all the different walls that they've been hitting. But given the current discussion, we agree that that's important data, and we need to do a better job of collecting. Amy talked a little bit about that, but I do want to reiterate that, because it is, I think, an important point that you make. We have to provide a sense of the scale.
Anyone else have any questions? I'll ask one more of each of you. We can go quick. I knew it was going to get heated at some point, so just to try to bridge some of those differences there. Kiran, what do you think is the biggest thing that tech companies or security pros or even just Americans in general might be missing in the national security community's arguments?
I think that the most important thing is to start with, when we talk about this issue, we really do have shared values. I mean, if there's nothing else that comes from this discussion, I think that's one of the important points, because that often gets missed when we talk about the different issues with the technology, with the economic issues, the competitive advantage issues, and the other policy issues, because those are all important parts of this. But if we can start from, we have these shared values, we want to figure out what best way to maximize those values, and then we can have that, that robust discussion on what the best way is. But if we're all trying to get to the same end goal, I think that's an important piece.
And what do you think the U.S. government needs to do to help its case?
I think part of it, we just have to be clear about what the issues are. Providing important data to folks as part of this discussion is also helpful. But that's part of why we do these events, is so that people can hear directly from us what we're asking for, or what we're really telling the American public, which is, you've given us these authorities. Those authorities are not they're not as useful anymore because of the rapid change of technology, and what should we as a country do about it?
And Matt, so there had been some questions earlier about whether the private sector or the smartest minds had done enough to try to solve this. So what do you think what's the biggest thing that you think that they're missing when they say that? And do you think that it is worth some more research or exploration going forward in the private sector to see if something is actually possible here?
Well, it's a research problem that we've been working on since before the FBI told us about their concerns, which is how do we build large-scale things that are secure? That's a high priority. And of course, as an academic researcher, I think the government should put lots of funding into that problem and fund people like me to think about it more. But I won't pretend that it's a brand new problem, but it's one that I think is an increasing national priority. But it's one that we don't know how to solve.
Interesting. And so, John, at a company where the business model is essentially to keep people totally secure through encryption, what's the biggest thing that you think that the government is maybe missing about how this could affect businesses, American or international? And do you sympathize at all with the plight that law enforcement describes?
Oh, I think I sympathize with the plight completely, but we are in a multi-country world where there are not shared values across the countries. And I'm in a situation where I worry about what happens when a warrant comes in from another country where they say that even though this person wasn't even born there, their grandparents were, and so therefore they have a right to certain data. I worry about the costs of how those of us who build this would be able to do this, and that it effectively turns us into something that we don't want to be, which is a supra-government authority that decides whose information, which often is who lives and who dies, goes out. That we are in a situation where the devices that we manufacture are being built in countries where we could be held hostage with that. And it isn't a matter of we are only in one area where we have shared values. We are in a huge hostile world where there is information warfare going on for economic reasons, for things that are theft, and the techniques that we have that we're as good as we are at them. I mean, I think that part of the reason that this debate's come up again is that we're actually starting to make progress. And there is a very difficult problem in those of us who are international versus the interests of one country or another, or even countries that we share values with.
Great. I think that's all the time we have. I will turn it back over to David.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you very much to Dell for sponsoring us today. Thank you particularly to the Department of Justice and the FBI for sending out their good folks to talk about this. And to all of our panelists, thank you very much. CSMPasscode.com. Sign up for our newsletter. We'd love to see you very soon. Take care.